Welcome back to One More Mana. My name is Derik, and today we are getting into some Innistrad Remastered spookiness. Huge shout out to Wizards of the Coast. We at the Mana Squad are part of the MTG ambassadors for both Innistrad Remastered and Aether Drift, so we'll have a few extra bonus videos coming out over the next month to celebrate all the spicy newness. And obviously, y'all know I could not wait to put on this camera and go on some rants about Innistrad. If y'all know, I love Innistrad more than anything else about Magic. When I first got into Magic, my first little thing that I bought was a bundle of Eldritch Moon. Oh, it's great. And then there were shadows over Innistrad. It was just all this spookiness. There were tentacle monsters and werewolves, and what else could you ever want? It was just such an amazing, yeah, it got me hooked. I didn't know what any of the cards did, but I just saw the art and knew I wanted to be a part of it. And then I learned about OG Innistrad and all the Gothic horror and everything. It kept me hooked for good. So one of my favorite things, and then what I want to talk about in today's video, is the spider spawning deck from OG Innistrad. If y'all aren't familiar, back in 14 years ago, when OG Innistrad first came out, there was a spider spawning deck associated with it. Spider spawning is a card that says for 4 and a green, you create a 1/2 spider with reach for each creature in your graveyard, and you're able to flash it back. Effectively, there was this draft deck that developed where you self-milled yourself with Armored Scab and Deranged Assistants and Self Occultists and Mulch and all of these good things. Throw all your creatures in your graveyard, cast Spider Spawning, and then you could flash it back, get it back with Runic Repetition, use Memory's Journey to get stuff back in your library, and effectively create this like pseudo infinite loop of just casting, Spider Spawning, and getting it back, and just making as many spiders as you could ever want. And in the most like thematic, flavorful Innistrad way possible, you effectively beat your opponent by drowning them with spiders. It was just the dream. I think more than any other limited deck I've ever seen, it felt like you're basically playing a janky commander deck, except winning games of limited. It's both powerful, kind of janky, all the way amazing. And I've probably watched more hours of triple Innistrad drafts on YouTube than I have of commander content. It is just my favorite thing to watch, and I just want to see people draft the spider spawning deck and win with it, and just makes me happy. So much so that I've talked about it plenty on the channel, but I have a commander deck completely based around this draft deck that I'll talk a little bit about at the end of the video and have the deck list down below. So yeah, this deck is amazing. But something interesting, it's Innistrading, I guess, for the new Innistrad Remastered version, is there's some stuff missing. This got me nervous at first. You don't have Armored Scab in Innistrad Remastered. There's no Self Occultist. You don't have Mulch. And when I first saw kind of all of these pieces not there, there's no Runic Repetition, there's no Memory's Journey, there's no Knot of the Bone, I got nervous, I'm not gonna lie. I looked at that Scryfall list of the card gallery and I was like, oh no. Like all of the things that I love, why are they not here? And then finally, I took a second, had a little pep talk with my cat, threw some paws at me, got me hyped up, and I was ready to go look back and realize it's still there. It's just a little bit more of a puzzle to solve. So what I want to do is go over each of the categories that made this Innistrad spider spawning deck amazing and talk about the new cards in Innistrad Remastered that have kind of taken those places. Basically, I'm going to focus on all commons and uncommons. In a draft environment, you can't count on rares. You can hope to get lucky, but you basically just need to count on mostly commons and then try to get lucky with some of the uncommons. So that first category is that self-mill. I already talked about it with the mulches and all that. Really, the only major self-mill piece that is back from OG Innistrad is that you have Forbidden Alchemy and Deranged Assistant. Outside of that, the rest of the pieces are gone, but they might have gotten better. We have something like a Grizzled Angler, which is insane because it's repeatable mill. Love that in there. It's doing a really, really good job. Eccentric Farmer is at common and mills you upon entering and get you a land back. This is kind of the perfect thing where it's only putting creatures into your graveyard if you have a creature heavy deck, and being at common, you have a chance to see this card a lot, which is great. Another card at common that I was so excited to see is Grapple with the Past. It is so powerful. It mills you, and then you can actually get a creature or a land back. These two commons will be the backbone if you're trying to draft this spider spawning deck that you hope to see over and over again. There's a lot of downshifts in this deck, and I think one of the biggest downshifts for me is Splinter Fright. Splinter Fright was a rare in Innistrad, and now at uncommon, it is a 3-mana creature that has power and toughness equal to the number of creatures in your graveyard. It mills you, and it has trample. This thing is an engine for the deck. If something happens to your spider spawning, it is a win con in the deck. It is so powerful, and the fact that it is uncommon means it's more likely that you can actually get it to put in there. This 100% was one of those dream scenarios in a spider spawning deck back in the day. So seeing this at uncommon is kind of wild. Now, okay, you're going to mill yourself. You get all your stuff in your graveyard. One of the other things you want to have besides tons of creatures in a deck like this is flashback effects. If your interaction, your other effects that you want, you don't want to rely on having to draw things when so much of your deck doesn't care about card advantage and basically only cares about dumping stuff in your graveyard. So if you want removal, stuff like Silent Departure is the way to go. If you do want card draw, stuff like Think Twice is the way to go, so that way you can use it after it's in your graveyard. These are a common to similar thing. If you see it, if there's one, regardless, go ahead and grab that, because it's going to help fuel that deck and get that interaction, because you don't want to be relying on, oh gosh, I got to draw the interaction. Being able to cast it from your graveyard is going to save you a lot of the time. But there's also cool effects. There's tons of flashback. I think one of my favorite effects is, if you can't interact to prolong the game, because so much of this deck is about prolonging the game until you can cast your spider spawning, just gain life. We don't have Knot of the Bone, but we do have a Brambleworm at common, which you can exile from your graveyard to gain 5 life. And I love that. Plus late game is just a big beater if you happen to have the mana for it. Okay, so we talked about mill. We talked about stuff in the graveyard. And the next category for this is the redundancies. And this is where I think Innistrad Remastered is kind of a game changer compared to OG Innistrad. We basically had spider spawning in OG Innistrad, and maybe Knot of the Bone if you count that because it's a stall technique. Innistrad Remastered, we got a bunch of new toys. We have spider spawning. We have Vile Spawn Spider as like a secondary effect to get a bunch of tokens on the board based on creatures in your graveyard on a creature, which is great. And we also have Rise from the Tides at uncommon, which is awesome, because if you end up in a weird situation where you do end up having like a bunch of Grapple with the Past and Think Twices and more instances in sorceries than you kind of planned, you're kind of awkward in a draft space, take this Rise from the Tides at uncommon. It's basically, look, you got 50-50. You can at least make some zombies off of this and still get into some of those same loops as you would with spider spawning, except now you got zombies. So getting the chance to potentially have a Rise from the Tides and a spider spawning in the same deck, even though it's pulling you 2 different directions. A lot of times draft decks, you have some weird combo of creatures and instants and sorceries anyway for your removal. This can kind of play on that if you end up in a weird spot. And plus, Lab Maniac has been downshifted to uncommon. It is no longer a rare, so you can also be in a spot where you're milling yourself getting to these spiders. Look, you end up in a spot, you just got to try to draw yourself. The Lab Man is there at uncommon to help bail you out. So between Lab Man, Rise from the Tides, Vile Spawn Spider, and spider spawning, you're in a spot where you're likely to at least see one of these if you start going in this direction, which is really cool. It's nice to have options. I think the toughest thing for me is not having Runic Repetition or Memory's Journey to have that flashback back to hand, recast, reshuffle. But you kind of got some like bootleg versions, so to speak. Mystic Retrieval at uncommon is kind of that like return. You get an instant or sorcery back from your graveyard to your hand. And then you can flash it back for 2 in a red if you want to splash red. The biggest thing is just getting that instant or sorcery back so you can cast spider spawning, get it back the next turn, cast it again, all that good stuff. So it's like a pseudo Runic Repetition, worse. But if you have an Epitaph Golem at 5 mana for a 3/5 creature, you can pay 2 mana to put target card from your graveyard on the bottom of your library. If you get to a situation where you can just mill yourself and stall out and you have a bunch of spiders, you can effectively get to a situation where you put spider spawning back on the bottom, draw it, cast spider spawning, put it back on the bottom, and you're just casting it every turn with your Epitaph Golem if you've managed to mill yourself and stall out. And you kind of get into that same fun goodness that you did with the Memory's Journey, Runic Repetition, and spider spawning in the past. So that's kind of the new version of it. And you can see as I'm getting more and more excited as I talk about it, it's missing some of those key pieces, but the new stuff brought in makes the deck feel different. And it's just like, ooh, okay, I want to give this a try. I want to try to draft this, see if I can get this to work and see if I can live the dream. It's not the same, but it does have all of those key components. So obviously, no matter what my first pack is, I got to try to force it and try to make it work. But let's say you try to draft it and you just can't get the spider spawning deck to work. You've done so many drafts and you haven't got it. Well, then you just build a commander deck around it. You do what I did. The first time I ever saw this, I think like the progenitor of the spider spawning commander deck, I think it's by David Marshall. BDM, one of the first kind of like pieces of Magic media I consumed was a podcast back when BDM was on the command zone talking about his Sidisi spider spawning deck. And when I heard you could make this deck into a commander deck, it made me want to learn what commander was and made me want to play it, because it just seemed so cool that, yeah, there's this like legendary draft deck everyone wants to play. You can just play it every game. And that blew my mind. So with my Sidisi spider spawning commander deck, and I have the full deck list down in the description, one of the biggest keys to making this feel one like a spider spawning deck and not just a self-mill are the win cons. I've played this deck for years now and gone through different engines and win cons and all these things. And I've gotten to points in this deck where I've played every card from Innistrad Limited you could. I mean, I still have my Keswick Cage Breakers, I still have Splinter Fret, I still have Runic Repetition, Memory's Journey, Mulch, Gnaw to the Bone. All those pieces are still in there. But I made it's at points where it was like 50% Innistrad cards, and it still didn't feel right, and I couldn't figure out why. And to me, the win cons are the most important thing. Are your spiders winning you the game? I've recently cut things like Living Death, like Sir Conrad, all those types of abilities, and instead put in things like Rot Widow Pack, which drains each of your opponents for the number of spiders you control, or Ishkanal, that's going to drain target opponent for the number of spiders you control. The biggest thing about this deck is, honestly, to make it feel as flavorful, stuff as many. If you build this Innistrad Remastered spider spawning deck in a draft, keep all those pieces, put them all into that commander deck, make it feel that vibe, but make sure those win cons stay on track with that as you evolve the deck. You're always going to upgrade it, put in new shiny pieces, all these things. But for me, if you do want to have that spiders are winning me the game, make sure the win cons are continuing that vibe for you. Otherwise, it's just going to feel like it's a side. You know, if you get that beautiful old border, shiny spider spawning, you stuff it in it, you want it to be the all-star. You want it to be the reason you're winning the game, not just a bystander. Be like, yeah, I have a spider spawning deck. Oh, I just Living Death. And yeah, I won. Or yeah, I got my spider spawning deck. Oh, Sir Conrad just murdered the table before I ever got to make a single spider. It's a different deck. Not saying it's not any fun, but if you want to get that vibe, you got to get the pieces right. And like I said, specifically get those win cons right. Well, let me know in the comments below. Have y'all ever had a commander deck focused around a limited combo? Was there like a draft you had or a pre-release that you had that just, you had so much fun that you were just like, look, I need to just force all these pieces into a commander deck and go? Or maybe spider spawning itself. I know it's a super popular limited deck from back in the day. Do y'all have your own versions of the spider spawning deck? I would love to see those as well. Like I said before, we at the Mana Squad are MTG ambassadors for both Innistrad Remastered and Aether Drift, so stay tuned for extra content, extra videos. Hit up the link down there to get your own Innistrad Remastered. And until we come back, stay petty.